San Quentin State Prison stands as one of the oldest, most formidable correctional institutions in the United States. It is a place where the darkest corners of human nature have been laid bare, where countless lives have been shaped by violence, desperation, and unimaginable cruelty. With its towering walls and electrified fences, San Quentin is more than a prison. It is a symbol of both punishment and fear. Inside, the echoes of a long and bloody history resonate, reminding everyone that this place is not just about incarceration. It's about holding the most dangerous individuals the world has ever seen. This prison has become infamous not only for its long history, but for the men it houses. Men who have committed crimes so horrifying that their names are etched into the annals of American criminal history. These are not just ordinary criminals. These are individuals whose actions have shaken the very fabric of society, leaving behind scars that may never fully heal. Their stories are haunting, chilling, and incredibly unsettling, each one more twisted and disturbing than the last. Over the years, San Quentin has been home to a myriad of dangerous individuals, but among them, 5 stand out above the rest. These men are infamous not only because of the horrific crimes they committed, but also because of the dark power they wielded, even while behind bars. Their legacies continue to cast a long shadow over the history of this prison and the justice system as a whole. The story of San Quentin isn't just about high-profile inmates. It's about the men whose names evoke fear and brutality, the ones who have left an indelible mark on both the prison and society at large. These are not just criminals. They are figures whose actions and influence reverberated far beyond the steel bars of their cells, impacting the world in ways that still resonate today. The 5 individuals we're about to discuss aren't just killers. They are symbols of the darkest, most dangerous forces that can exist within the human soul. Each one of them represents a different form of evil, but they all have one thing in common: their ability to instill fear, even after they were locked away. Some of them operated alone, while others were part of notorious gangs or cults that manipulated and controlled their followers with chilling precision. Their crimes were not just acts of violence. They were carefully planned, executed with cold calculation, and designed to send shockwaves through society. Before we explore the details of each of these individuals, let's first take a step back and understand the prison that has been their home. San Quentin was founded in 1852, making it California's oldest correctional facility. What started as a modest institution designed to house a few hundred inmates has grown into a sprawling complex, a fortress that holds some of the most infamous criminals in the nation. Over the decades, it has witnessed countless violent confrontations, broken lives, and unspeakable acts of brutality. Perhaps one of the most notorious aspects of San Quentin is its death row, which has housed some of the most high-profile cases in modern criminal history. The prison has been home to numerous murderers, rapists, and gang leaders, all of whom have left their own unique imprint on the place. But it's not just the criminals themselves that make San Quentin so infamous. It's the stories that have come out of this place. Stories of betrayal, power struggles, and violence that have turned this prison into a living nightmare for those unlucky enough to be housed here. The gas chamber at San Quentin has not been used since 1993, and the lethal injection chamber, which replaced it, saw its last execution in 2006. But the fear that emanates from these chambers is still alive in the stories of the men who were sentenced to die here. Their actions have cemented San Quentin's place as a symbol of ultimate punishment, a place where even the most dangerous individuals are forced to face the consequences of their actions if they survive long enough to do so. Over the years, many of the inmates who have passed through San Quentin's gates have left a legacy of violence and terror. But among them, there are a select few whose names continue to haunt us. These are the men who have shaped the history of this prison and the justice system itself. The ones who have defied the law, manipulated the system, and wielded power from behind bars. And now, we are going to recount the stories of these individuals, whose crimes and actions continue to send chills down the spine. Each of these men was dangerous in their own way. Some were masterminds of violence, while others were simply ruthless in their pursuit of power. But no matter their methods, they all shared one common trait: a complete disregard for human life and an ability to inspire fear in anyone who crossed their path. They were the worst of the worst, and they left a legacy that continues to haunt San Quentin to this day. But there is one man on this list whose influence extends far beyond the prison walls. His actions, his charisma, and his ideology didn't just shake the foundations of San Quentin, they sent shockwaves across the entire nation. This man's name is forever etched into the dark history of American crime, and his legacy is one that we will explore in detail. As we begin our countdown of the top 5 most dangerous inmates to ever call San Quentin home, we must remember that these are not just men who committed heinous crimes. They are symbols of a darker side of humanity, a side that thrives on fear, power, and manipulation. Their stories are a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurk behind prison walls, and the consequences of their actions continue to reverberate through time. So without further delay, let's begin our countdown. These are the men who made San Quentin the place it is today. Starting with number 5. Number 5, Gunnar J. Lindberg, a man whose actions have left an indelible mark on the history of violent hate crimes in California. Gunnar J. Lindberg was not just another name added to San Quentin's roster of notorious inmates. He was a man whose actions in 1996 sent shockwaves through the community of Tustin, California and beyond. His crime was not born out of desperation, revenge, or even greed. It was an act fueled by hate, calculated and executed with chilling precision. At the heart of this tragedy was Thanh Minh Le, a 24-year-old Vietnamese American who had achieved so much in his young life. A Harvard graduate, he returned home to visit his family, carrying with him hopes and dreams of a bright future. But one evening, while rollerblading at his old high school's tennis courts, his life came to an abrupt and brutal end. Lindberg, a self-proclaimed neo-Nazi along with his accomplice, approached Lai under the cover of darkness. The attack was swift and savage. Lai was stabbed multiple times in what prosecutors later described as a hate crime of unimaginable cruelty. This wasn't a random act. It was targeted, and it left a community reeling in anger, grief, and fear. As news of the murder spread, it became clear that this was not just a tragedy for Lai's family, but a stark reminder of the deep-seated prejudices that still existed in society. The Vietnamese American community, already grappling with issues of discrimination, now had to face the harsh reality of a crime that many believed was motivated purely by racial hatred. When the trial began, the courtroom was packed with people demanding justice. The evidence against Lindberg was overwhelming. His own words, his affiliations, and his lack of remorse painted a picture of a man who not only committed a crime but reveled in the pain it caused. The jury did not take long to reach a verdict on guilty. Lindberg was sentenced to death, a punishment reserved for crimes so heinous that society deems no lesser consequence appropriate. But sentencing a man to death is not the end of the story. San Quentin State Prison became Lindberg's new home, a place where managing inmates like him is a challenge in itself. His neo-Nazi affiliations, his violent tendencies, and his influence on others make him a constant threat to the fragile order within the prison walls. Guards, inmates, and administrators alike know that individuals like Lindberg do not simply fade into the background. They remain a source of tension, a reminder of the ideologies that can breed hatred and violence. Now, as we reflect on this case, it raises a broader question about justice and deterrence. Do sentences like this truly prevent hate crimes, or do they merely punish the individual without addressing the roots of the issue? Number 4, Bruce McGregor Davis. Bruce McGregor Davis's involvement in the notorious Manson family cult is chilling, not just because of the murders he participated in, but because of the influence Charles Manson had over his followers. The Manson family was a group that started as a commune, but soon became a gang, a cult. At its peak, the group consisted of around 100 members, many of whom were young women from middle-class backgrounds who had been radicalized by Manson's teachings. They lived an unconventional lifestyle, heavily influenced by psychedelic drugs and radical beliefs. They believed Manson was a manifestation of Jesus Christ and followed his apocalyptic prophecies, including the idea of a race war. The family's murderous spree began in 1969, when Manson's followers killed at least 9 people, although some claim the true body count may be as high as 24. Davis's role in the murders of Gary Hinman and Donald Shorty Shea cemented his place in history. The family's killing spree wasn't just a random series of violent acts. It was driven by Manson's delusions. Manson believed that a race war, which he called helter-skelter, was imminent. and it was in this environment that Davis, along with the other members, carried out these brutal crimes. While Manson's ideology didn't directly lead to the murders, he never actually gave the order. It's clear that his teachings, the race war, and his influence over the family were key factors in what happened. Davis's transformation within the cult is unsettling. He wasn't just a follower. He was deeply immersed in Manson's teachings. As the cult's grip tightened, Davis became more deeply involved in the violence. His participation in the murders was part of his twisted belief in Manson's vision of an apocalyptic world. The psychological angle is important because it highlights how a person like Davis, who is not a born criminal, could be transformed into one under the influence of Manson's charismatic leadership and the family's collective delusions. Davis has been denied parole several times over the years. Even in prison, he's still considered a dangerous individual. He's been labeled as one of the most influential and dangerous members of the Manson family, not only because of his past actions, but because of his ongoing loyalty to Manson's ideology. There's also a fascinating yet chilling connection between the Manson family's influence and modern-day prison dynamics. Even after all these years, there are still whispers of Manson's ideology affecting some of the most dangerous inmates in California's prisons. Davis's continued imprisonment shows that Manson's reach extended far beyond his initial cult. It still lingers, even in the most secure places. But it's not over. The Manson family's influence didn't end with the arrests. Despite years in prison, Davis and his fellow cult members continue to be a reminder of how dangerous charismatic figures can be, even behind bars. Could their twisted beliefs still be affecting the prison system today? Number 3. Tiquon Lil Fee Cox. Tiquon Lil Fee Cox's association with the Rollin 60s Crips is an essential part of understanding the violent acts he committed. The Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips is one of the most notorious and influential sets within the larger Crips street gang. Originating in Hyde Park, Los Angeles in 1976, the Rollin 60s gang spread quickly across other cities, with membership now estimated to be around 1,600 members. Members of this gang often mark their territory with graffiti and are known to identify themselves by wearing the Seattle Mariners or Chicago White Sox logos, which are symbols of their affiliation. In 1984, Cox, as a member of this gang, participated in the brutal murder of 4 family members of NFL player Kermit Alexander. This violent act was fueled by gang culture and was an example of the kind of tragic escalation often seen in areas heavily influenced by gang violence. The Rollin 60s, with its deep-rooted history of violence, played a central role in the mindset that led Cox to commit such heinous acts. Following his arrest, Cox was put on trial for the murder of Kermit Alexander's family. Despite the violent nature of his crime, Cox's history and status within the Rollin 60s Crips gang had a significant impact on how the case was viewed by both the community and the courts. His actions were seen as a tragic manifestation of the ongoing violence associated with gang life. Cox's death sentence was handed down, but his behavior during incarceration has continued to reflect the deep-rooted mentality that led to his violent acts. His affiliations with the Rollin 60s and his status as a gang member behind bars presented a challenge for prison authorities. As we see with many gang members, parole is often a point of contention. Parole is a form of early release for prisoners who agree to abide by behavioral conditions, but for members of violent gangs like the Rollin 60s, the potential for reoffending and continued gang involvement remains a serious concern. Cox's case is a reminder that breaking free from this life is not always as easy as a sentence being served. It's about the constant tug-of-war between the individual and the gang culture that continues to exert control, even from behind bars. The pain and devastation caused by Cox's crime went far beyond the victims. Kermit Alexander, who lost his mother, brother, and 2 nieces in the attack, has spoken openly about the emotional toll of the loss. For a community already struggling with gang violence, the murder of an innocent family felt like another crushing blow. Cox's actions did not just devastate one family, they left scars on the entire neighborhood, reminding us all of the cycle of violence that affects so many lives. Now I want to ask you, how can communities work together to prevent gang violence before it escalates? What can be done to break the cycle of violence that destroys families and neighborhoods? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Number 2. Timothy Joseph McGee. Timothy McGee is a name that strikes fear into the heart of anyone familiar with gang violence. A notorious figure, he was the ruthless leader of the Toonerville Reefa 13, a gang that has been responsible for numerous crimes across Los Angeles. McGee wasn't just a figurehead in the gang, he was the mastermind behind some of the most violent and brutal attacks, orchestrating a reign of terror that left law enforcement and rival gangs in a constant state of fear. What made McGee particularly dangerous was his willingness to attack anyone who stood in his way. Not just rival gang members, but law enforcement as well. He was known for his cold and calculated violence, targeting police officers with the same disregard for human life as he did with any other rival. McGee's name became synonymous with a crime spree that lasted for years. One of the most infamous aspects of his reign of terror was his ambush-style shootings. These weren't random acts of violence, they were carefully planned, executed with precision, and meant to send a clear message to anyone who might dare to cross him. His gang wasn't content with merely controlling territory, they aimed to intimidate everyone, from civilians to police officers, ensuring no one was safe. But what made McGee's attacks especially terrifying was his ability to orchestrate these shootings in broad daylight, in crowded public spaces. The sheer audacity of his actions made him a feared figure in the criminal world and beyond. He was a master of using violence to control and instill fear, and no one was safe from his reach. After years of terror, McGee's luck finally ran out. The manhunt for him was intense, spanning several months, as law enforcement worked tirelessly to track him down. When McGee was finally captured, it was clear that his crimes had left a deep scar on the community. His trial was as high profile as his capture, with the prosecution eager to see justice served for the lives he had destroyed. In the end, McGee was convicted and he now sits on death row, awaiting the consequences of his actions. But even though he is locked away behind bars, his influence still looms over the gang world. But here's the chilling thought. Even in prison, McGee's reach didn't end. His power was not confined to the streets. It extended behind prison walls, where his reputation and influence continued to shape the lives of those who followed him. Do you think someone like McGee could still hold sway over his gang, even from behind bars? Or does true justice come when the influence of these gang leaders is finally broken? Number 1, Charles Manson. Charles Manson is a name that will forever be etched into the darkest corners of American history. His story is one of manipulation, violence, and tragedy, a chilling tale of how one man's ability to control and influence others led to unspeakable acts. Manson wasn't just a criminal, he was the leader of a cult, a self-proclaimed messiah who used his charm and charisma to convince his followers to commit heinous murders in his name. His crimes shocked the nation, and his legacy continues to haunt the world. Manson's power was in his words, in his ability to twist reality and plant seeds of chaos in the minds of vulnerable people. He didn't need weapons to control his followers. He used his voice, his beliefs, and his manipulation. The Tate LaBianca murders are some of the most horrific crimes in American history, and Manson was the mastermind behind it all. He convinced his followers, young people looking for purpose and belonging, that the murders were part of a larger, apocalyptic vision. He believed in a race war, a war he called helter-skelter, where violence would set the stage for the downfall of society. Under his spell, Manson's followers were known as the Family, carried out the brutal killings of actress Sharon Tate and several others in 1969. The murders were savage, senseless, and seemingly random, but they were all part of Manson's delusional plan to start a revolution. The horrifying thing is that these murders were not carried out by Manson directly. He didn't have to lift a finger. His control over his followers was so strong that they did the unthinkable for him, without question driven by their belief in his twisted vision. After Manson and his followers were arrested, his story didn't end. Far from it. Manson's time in prison, particularly in San Quentin, only seemed to add to his infamy. He remained a figure of fascination, even behind bars. It was almost as if the prison walls couldn't contain his influence. He continued to hold sway over his followers, even from the confines of his cell. His ability to manipulate and control those around him persisted, and he was often seen as a symbol of chaos and rebellion. Manson's life in prison was filled with violence, with several incidents of threats and altercations. But his legacy continued to grow, as his story became the subject of books, documentaries, and countless media appearances. His name became synonymous with the extreme danger posed by mind control, cults, and the darkest side of human nature. Charles Manson's legacy is a haunting reminder of the power of manipulation. His crimes serve as a chilling example of how one man's charisma can lead others to commit unspeakable acts. The lives he destroyed, the families he tore apart, and the lasting impact of his twisted vision continue to reverberate through society. Manson's story is a tragic one, not just for his victims, but for everyone who's been touched by the darkness he spread. As we reflect on his life and his crimes, we're left with the question, how could one man have such power over so many? How did Manson manage to turn vulnerable young people into killers, all in the name of his delusional beliefs? Charles Manson's story is more than just a criminal case. It's a reminder of the dangers of blind devotion, the fragility of the human mind, and the terrifying potential of manipulation. Do you think there's ever been anyone like Charles Manson in history? How can we protect ourselves from the power of manipulation in today's world? Today, we've explored the stories of 5 of the most dangerous criminals to ever walk the earth. From the violent rampages of Bruce McGregor Davis and Timothy McGee to the chilling influence of Charles Manson, each of these men left an indelible mark on society. Their crimes were brutal, their motivations twisted, and their legacies are filled with pain and suffering for the countless lives they destroyed. We've seen the horrors they caused, but we've also seen the aftermath, the lasting impact on their victims, their families, and even the communities they terrorized. Their time in prison hasn't been enough to erase the fear and destruction they brought into the world. In fact, many of them continue to wield power, even from behind bars. And that raises an important question. How do we ensure that those who pose such a grave threat to society are kept safely away from the public? Do you believe prisons like San Quentin are doing enough to protect society from these dangerous individuals? What should be done to ensure that people like these can't continue to harm others, even from behind bars? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and your opinion matters. As we close this chapter, remember that this is only the beginning. Stay tuned as we uncover more stories from behind prison walls, where the darkness of human nature continues to thrive. There are more criminals, more twisted minds, and more stories that need to be told. Don't miss what's coming next.